Hi, my name is Tom Ollerton, and this is the Shiny New Object podcast. This is a podcast about new marketing technology, and every week I have the pleasure of interviewing an inspirational, an important, sometimes an academic, sometimes very funny person. And I'm very excited to be interviewing Dan Calladine, who is Head of Media Features at Carat. I have been familiar with Dan's work for pretty much my whole career, and every now and again you would sit in a meeting and someone would go, "Have you read that thing Dan Calladine wrote?" And they'd go, "Oh yeah, that's really good." So he's one of those guys in the industry, and before we meet him, I am contractually obliged to talk about the fact I'm speaking at the Data Driven Creative Conference in New York on the 7th of December. I say that being forced to say this, but I'm really excited about it. Who wouldn't be? I think it's going to be a brilliant conference, and so hopefully see you guys there. Oh, I've got a discount code, but I can't remember what it is, so give me a shout if you want that. Okay, Dan, after that glowing introduction, can you tell the audience who may not know who you are, what you do and how you ended up doing that?
Sure. So firstly, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I've listened to quite a lot of them. I really, really like them. So I work for Carat, which is a media agency, which is part of the Dentsu Aegis network. What a media agency does is traditionally it buys the space that the advertising then appears in, so TV, press, radio, whatever. Over the last few years, what's happened is that media agencies have started to get more deeply involved with all parts of the communication. So we also own creative agencies and content agencies, and we do an awful lot of things around the whole communication piece, the whole thing that lots of agencies do.
And how did you end up doing that job?
So,
or in that place, I should say.
I've been there for quite a long time, and I was working sort of in the 20th century. Blimey, I was working for a consultancy that looked at things like the effectiveness of TV advertising in a very offline world. Then I moved into an ad tech company, and then I was in the ad tech company, which I'll talk about a bit later on, for about a year or so, and then we got shaken out in the dot-com crash, and then one of the people who I'd known as a client in the ad tech company worked at Carat and sort of got me in for a chat with people. And actually, I was amazingly lucky. I think my job interview was 15 minutes, and at the end of the job interview, the person who interviewed me just said, "Well, think you're good," and stuff like that.
And what was the job?
So the job at that point was to be an account director for digital for some of the clients that we had.
Right, a 15-minute interview is all it takes for an account.
Yeah, and so I'm always I was amazingly lucky, but also, the point was I was on a 3-month probationary and things like that. It always amazes me when people talk about going through 13 interviews to work at Google, and I can sort of see why they do it, but I always think that actually you probably don't need that many interviews. And you probably can get quite a strong signal about somebody in a short period of time. And so, so I've been there coming up, I think, for about 15 years. So actually, the interview was quite impressive in terms of thinking I might be quite a good fit for the organisation. I might be quite a good fit for the job.
So how do you get from account director to being head of media features?
So if I can recall. So what happened was that as the company grew, we needed people who would effectively be on the research side of it. And in those days, there were lots of things like how many people have a phone in France and how many people use the internet in Italy. And so we needed one sort of central point of truth so that we weren't all effectively creating the same presentations but doing our own versions of it using different data. And I'd always been really interested in data, in the actual number side of it. I've got an economics degree. And so I sort of volunteered for that because I'd been doing that sort of thing anyway. and saying, well, I think these are the most reliable figures for this. And in the early days of the internet, there were all sorts of conflicting numbers about how many people were online, apart from anything. And also because I'd come from an ad tech background, so I was working for an ad serving company, I also knew about the numbers, and I was quite good at sense checking things, and I knew how you could measure effectiveness as well.
Right, Dan. Oh God, you know what? I've realised how utterly Alan Partridge I sound when I do this. Now is the getting to know you section. The next guest I have on, I'm going to have a really smooth way of doing that. But
I was half expecting you to play the song, the getting to know you song.
Next time, I promise. So, I don't know why I asked this question, because I don't really read very much, but what is the marketing book you recommend most often? And it may fall into my
well, I've actually got
category of 3.
I've actually got 2 if I'm allowed to. So
yeah,
the
course,
first one. So quite a lot of what I do is meeting new startups and trying to introduce new startups to people within the network. And so one of the books I always recommend to people is a book by Peter Thiel, which is called 0 to 1. And Peter Thiel is a Silicon Valley investor, a venture capitalist. He's on the board of Facebook. I think he was the first external investor in Facebook. And I think the story is that he effectively invested $500,000 with Mark Zuckerberg for 10% of the company back in the very early days. He was the first external investor, and then he doesn't still own 10% of Facebook, but he subsequently sort of sold quite a lot of that off. But he's also invested in a number of other companies. And the reason
as the Trump administration.
And so if you talk about him these days, obviously there is baggage which goes with his name, but. There's a fantastic, I think it's in the first chapter of the book, and he says whenever he interviews somebody, a new founder for the first time, what he says to them is, what important truth do you know that most people disagree with you about? And so for Elon Musk, and he's very good friends with Elon Musk because they're both at PayPal, but for Elon Musk, his important truth would be people will buy a luxury electric car, because actually that would have been... that would have seemed ridiculous.
What's your truth?
I think my truth would be that young people are the most valuable marketing audience, because I actually think older people are the most valuable marketing audience for a lot of things, because increasingly they've got more income, more wealth, more assets, and potentially more disposable income. So I really like that one. It's a really good book about how...
So, sorry, I just want to find out a bit more about that. So how have you ended up with that view about older people? That sounds like
by getting older, really, to be honest. And I think also because, being a lot of conferences and endlessly reading things in trade journals about millennials this, millennials that, and just thinking, well, realistically speaking, I know people who are millennials, I know people who aren't millennials, I know which ones are probably in a better position to buy such and such a car or go on holiday to somewhere. I went on holiday a while ago. Do you know the holiday company Explore?
No.
So there's 2 companies. There's one called Explore, one called Exodus. They're kind of the... They started off, I think, as backpacker travel companies. And nowadays, the average age, and I hope I'm not breaking any confidences by saying this, because one of our tour leaders told me it, but I think the average age for somebody who goes on one of their tours now is in the mid-50s. And if you look at long haul, the average age is higher than that. And you can go on some of these things and there'll be people who are 70 there, because they've got more disposable income. I went on
so
one holiday.
I'm going to push you on your love of data there. So do you have any stats to back this up other than your personal experience of going on fancy backpacker trips somewhere?
I could find you some data and send it through to you.
Yes,
which is what I always say. I don't have it immediately to hand, but if you gave it 10 minutes on my phone or a laptop, I probably could.
So other than Peter Thiel 0 to 1, what was your second book?
So my second book, so I kind of have I read a lot, and I probably try to read about 40 books a year or so.
So can I push you on this?
Yeah.
How and when do you read?
So a couple of things really. One is that with a lot of work-related books, I've developed a theory that you can read them in 2 hours. If you just effectively skim with a pencil, just making a line against the bits which look really important, and just skipping over the bits you already know, and not really concentrating on the prose, but just looking for the ideas. And then in another 2 hours, you can go through and you can just write notes on the bits you scribbled on. So I guess 4 hours in total, but you can also get a pretty good view within half an hour of whether it's worth reading at all.
So do you read the first half hour properly, or is it a skim?
No, I sort of read the first chapter pretty properly and then try and skim, because then, I mean, I've got colleagues who say read the first chapter and the last chapter, the stuff in the middle is usually just not worth it, or just a few more examples based on things. But anyway, so I have a, and also apologies in advance, or apologies in retrospect to any authors whose books took them years to write and I've skimmed through in two hours. But I also have a theory that actually the best marketing books are books that are about things and have marketing as an aspect of them. So rather than a book about how to do such and such, or SEO or something, books that are about really interesting topics from people who were marketing. Like I think the previous podcast I listened to had somebody who's talking about Shoe Dog, the book about Nike.
Yeah, right.
And so my second book would be a book that came out last year, which is called What I Know About Running Coffee Shops. And it's about a guy from Ireland. I'm going to get his name wrong, but basically if you Google it, you'll find it. And he set up a chain of coffee shops in Dublin. And it's really about the whole economics of how coffee shops work. So anyone who likes going to cafes, likes food and likes drink, this is a really fascinating book, because he just talks about how the economics of it work.
So save me the 4 hours of reading that book.
Yeah. You'd love it, seriously.
Well, it does sound good for someone else who hasn't got the time to read the book, or even have 4 hours spare. What are the things in that book that really stuck with you?
Well, the best, I mean, it's a bit of a spoiler, because this, I think, is about the best story in the book. But they have a case where it's a really terrible situation. Somebody came in and they held the shop up with a knife, and they took the money from the till, and obviously everybody was traumatised, and they were wondering, what can we do? How can we actually protect ourselves? Do we want to hire bouncers? It'd be too expensive. So what they did was they emailed all the local police stations, and they said any police officer in uniform can get coffee for 50 cents or get coffee for €1. And then what that means is that every 10 minutes throughout the working day, there's a policeman or policewoman in uniform in the coffee shop, and it's just genius. It's just absolutely brilliant.
But did it work?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So and obviously, the police loved it, and yeah. So
although when I was the deputy manager of an off license, you're probably not supposed to serve people in uniform in the UK.
Well, I think it might not work in an off license.
Right. Oh yeah, of course.
But I think in a coffee shop that's sort of open during the daytime,
I
think it's quite good. But and the other reason why I like this book is I have a sort of quite a bizarre sort of side hustle hobby sort of thing, which is about 7 years ago, and this is sort of the most Nathan Barley thing anyone's ever done. I set up a website about pop-up restaurants, and this is because, so one of the things I do at work is I try to advise people on future trends and things which are happening, and things which are just sort of poking up above the surface. And so I set up this website, and I've now got like 160,000 followers on Twitter and about 38,000 followers on Instagram and things like that. But as a result of that, reading this book is really interesting about the economics and the marketing in hospitality.
You missold your side hustle there. Can you talk about what it is in a bit more detail? Because it is very impressive. So I
own the domain LondonPopUps.com. It's very Ron Seal. It does what it says on the tin. And I own the Twitter handle London Pop-Ups, and I own the Instagram handle, London Pop-Ups, all one word, no hyphen.
And what is it about pop-ups that interests you so much?
So it's kind of startups for food and drink. And also, one thing that was absolutely fascinating at the beginning was that it was all about social media. So nobody who was starting a food business, nobody who was starting a food truck really had any budget to advertise. And I think the food truck thing happened about 5 years before it did here in the States. And I remember thinking, well, it's, that's really fascinating, but it's not that likely to happen here, although it sort of has done with people like Curb and Street Feast. But also, we were just coming out of the recession, and there was quite a lot of empty space in places like Dalston and Hackney and Peckham. And so it's quite easy for somebody to get hold of a space, or somebody, when an area was gentrifying, to say to a coffee shop, well, would it be okay if I came in and you stayed open late on a Thursday night and I started cooking Japanese okonomiyaki or some other sorts of street food, and then that Thursday night would turn into Thursday and Friday, and then it'd be Thursday to Saturday, and then gradually more people would come in, and the whole sort of so it's super nerdy, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it's all about social media. I've learned so much about social media since I started doing it, and I've learned so much about how Instagram works. Well, I've learned that. I've learned on a practical level. I've learned how to do Instagram stories, which I would have never found out about otherwise. And also, I've just sort of delved into the whole rabbit hole of Instagram stories. And Instagram stories are, in many respects, what people used to accuse Twitter of 10 years ago. In that it is people saying, just having a cup of coffee, just walking down the street. You see people, the thing on Instagram stories where you can see how many stories somebody's posted because you get a little gap between each one of them.
Yeah.
Some people, it's almost like a solid line.
Yeah.
Because they've done like 30 in a day or something. So on a practical level, I've learned that, but also I've learned about how influencers work because I get PR companies sort of getting in touch with me all the time, and I've sort of seen the evolution of Twitter, because in the early days, a lot of food in London, or the whole pop-up thing in London, and food culture used to be driven by Twitter, basically, which is why I got so many Twitter followers, and now it's pretty much all moved on to Instagram. But actually, Twitter's much more practical because you can have links in tweets, and people can retweet, and things can go viral in a much better way than they can with Insta.
So for people who haven't seen your feed,
yeah.
you take a picture of the thing that you're eating at such and such pop-up.
Yeah.
And so how many of those do you think you've taken?
I think it's about... I think it's about 1,000. It's a bit over 1,000.
Right. And
it's about 1,100.
And have you worked out a correlation between how much you spend at the restaurant versus how many followers you've got? Because you bought...
I get... So it's pretty consistent. I make a note of all these things. I'm quite analytical with it. I basically get 1,000 extra followers for every 20 pictures I post.
Really?
And it correlates more with the number of pictures I post than with... how many days it is between the thousands, so to speak. But then it doesn't mean that if I just whacked up 20 photos, I get another 1,000 followers. It has to be quality stuff.
But how much does it cost you for 20 photographs? £5 a meal, £8 a meal?
Well, so some of the people I think the light went off with the microphone. So some of the people. So some of the people I go and visit are nice enough to give me things, which is very nice.
For free? Do you show up and flout your influence?
No.
A man of your means.
I know.
Oh my god.
Well, I know quite a lot of them. I know quite a lot of them anyway. But unlike some people who give influencers a bad name, I'm not like sending emails saying,
"Give me a hot dog."
Yeah, basically.
But look, I can keep pushing.
We digress.
We're not digressing at all. This is fascinating. I'm going to hopefully come back to that. Having a foodie career at one point myself.
Oh, what are you?
I worked in a kitchen.
Okay.
/ I was a chef.
Oh, which one?
There was a restaurant called Tabernacle, just down the street from me, on Tabernacle Street. It's now called McQueen's.
Okay. Oh, yes, I know that fancy food shop. Fancy clothes shop, rather.
No, anyway, it was a traditional Italian. I used to make pasta, but we can go on this another time. Different podcast. Okay, so in terms of your career, what has been the best investment of your time, energy, or money?
I think I think it has to be education, and I think some people. Well, again, Peter Thiel has a fund where he basically pays promising founders not to go to university, it just goes straight to founding their thing. But I think for me, it definitely has to be education. And by that, what I mean is sort of increasingly random stuff that I pay to do myself. So I went to the FT Weekend Festival 2 days ago. I paid for that myself, and it was just fantastic. There were about sort of 5 or 6 really good. Well, it's basically a literary festival organised by the FT, for Financial Times, and it's held in Kenwood House in Hampstead Heath. It happens every year, and you're there on the bus, sort of 9:30 in the morning, and you're just thinking, right, you're going to the FT festival, you're going to the FT festival, you two are definitely going to the FT festival. And sure enough, we all got out at the same bus stop. So there you go. But it's really good. They have a number of tents with different sessions, all named after different sections of the newspaper. And as quite often happens with conferences, the main tent is sort of very mainstream, can be quite boring, and some really interesting stuff happens in the more fringy tents. Like there was one about London house prices that I thought, well, I'll stay for 5 minutes and see if it's just, but actually it was really fascinating.
What did you learn?
Well, the property, according to this guy, the property ladder concept has broken because it's very hard to get from one rung to another, and it's very hard to get onto the rungs in the first place. So that's going to have all sorts of implications, I think. But also that, and again we're digressing.
We're not digressing at all. It's
okay, and what they claim is that in London it's now gone back to like 80% UK people buying property. Whereas it went a while ago, it was quite a long way below 80% because there was a lot of money from elsewhere in the world basically coming in because London property is such a good investment. So it was an interesting set. But I tried to go to something like that, whether it's an evening thing or a full day thing, at least once a month, maybe every couple of weeks or so. But then also. So it's just things like that, really. It's just.
How do you choose them? Do you let them sort of kind of filter into your bubble and then you pick them?
As you might have gathered, I've got relatively diverse interests in things, and I can sort of find relevance in quite often in the strangest subject areas. So so if something looks interesting and it costs 25 quid or something like that for a Tuesday evening,
just do it.
Then just do it. So,
in the last 5 years, which new belief or behaviour has improved your work life?
I think, as a bizarre one, I would think it would be hot desking, because I'm very much a morning person, and I usually get to work at about 8 o'clock in the morning. And so with hot desking, what it means is you can just pick to sit exactly where you want, nicest desk, whatever. And so I really like that. And I also really like...
What's the benefit of that?
Well, you can get a window seat, or you can, just choose, to sit in a nice part of the office.
Is there a kind of a competitive element to it?
No, not really. No, not really. And actually, to be fair, I do quite often sit in pretty much the same sort of place. But then what it also means is that as other people come in, they join the pod and they sit in the same, so then you have, sort of different colleagues to chat with every day, basically, but all amongst,
and that's
like a team of 20.
Carat.
No, it's in the building that I'm in at the moment.
Right.
So I don't think it's not in every floor of every building. But also I'm in an international department, so it makes sense for us because quite a lot of people are travelling. So there might be people who effectively are in the office for 1 week of a month. So it wouldn't be right to have them having a permanent desk.
So before we get on to shiny new object, a couple of extra questions. So
one I really wanted to ask, actually, you're going to get onto the...
You can ask me a question, or
No,
this is one of these you really want to answer.
So you sent over the list beforehand.
Don't give away my secret.
Oh, sorry.
I'm joking.
Anyway, I thought of the answer to this when I was crossing the road this morning, and one of the questions you had was, what's the most useful thing you bought with your own money for work?
Yeah.
And so I think most people say things like phones. Actually, I would say, I was going to say my phone, because I've got the Pixel 2. Have you tried the Pixel 2?
I've not tried the Pixel 2. Do you use the Assistant?
Yes. So
how often do you use the Assistant?
Well, I use it when I'm showing it off to people.
You see,
about the joys. But anyway, it's not my thing that I spend money on. Is
I'm going to pick your brains on this though.
It's not my phone.
What's so great about the Pixel 2?
Well, it's mostly that, but also the camera's really good. Obviously.
Oh, please! Really? That's the headline. Assistant that you only show to people to show assistant, and the camera's
no. But it's a step into the future, because, all phones will have this within a couple of years or so.
Sure.
And so you can stand outside a restaurant and you can just see automatically, okay, you could type the name in, but you can see automatically how many ratings it's got and things like that without actually going in. And so that's very useful. But the one I was going to talk about was a thing called Pinboard. Do you know Pinboard?
Don't know Pinboard. I don't think. Anyway,
Pinboard is a bookmarking. It's a bookmarking service. Did you ever hear of Delicious?
Of course, yeah.
So it's similar.
Did Delicious turn into something else, or did it?
Yeah. Delicious. I used to use
del.ic.
Yeah, they eventually bought Delicious.com, but it was one of these. Yeah, it was one of these sort of weird ones, and it was very Web 1.0 really, in that it was. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to save any web page and sort of write your own notes on it, or just take an extract from it. And so it's kind of it's for people once they've filled up their browser bar, once they've filled up their favourites bar rather.
Yeah.
You use something like this. So one of the things I do at work as well is I write a newsletter which goes out every Friday. Actually, with my trends thing, a lot of the ideas come from this, and so I probably add about 50 links or so. So yeah, sorry, I don't think I finished explaining what it does. So if you see a really interesting article about electric cars, you would bookmark that article using Pinboard, and you then put tags on it, like you might put tag Tesla, you might put automotive, you might put electric, you might put future, you might put cities, and then when you want to find all the interesting stories you read at some point in the past about Tesla, you can just click on the thing and then all your Tesla stories will be there. And then if you want to find an article about Tesla which talks about Tesla and mapping, then you have another tag for mapping, and then you can find that. So I spent about a $5 of my own money a few years ago to join Pinboard. And Pinboard's business model is that there's a one-off fee when you join, although there's sort of more premium versions which I don't do, and then basically it's free after that, and it sustains it. And the guy who runs it, sort of very entertaining on Twitter and stuff. He's very political at the moment in the States. He's one of the people who is trying to connect people in Silicon Valley with people in the midterm elections to give them a better chance of trying to get their support out and use technology for their campaigning. But anyway, this thing cost me about a $5, or definitely less than a $10, and I've now got like thousands and thousands of links. And if you wanted to ask me, sort of examples of how, FMCG brands are using social media, or how FMCG brands have used virtual reality, then I could just, a few clicks, 10 links, put them in an email, send them across to people.
Right.
It really is.
So your actual board, up in board with all those links, probably financially quite valuable. Maybe there's your next, put it on your Instagram stories.
Well, maybe, but then also I think, but also it's, So what I've found, I think most people who have blogs about 10 years ago have stopped updating their blogs. But I've never stopped updating this, and this isn't really public facing. This is more sort of my own private database, essentially.
Oh, that sounds incredibly useful.
And about the only other person I know, well, my friend Lynette actually, she got me onto Delicious ages ago. But about the only other person I've met who sort of also raves about it is a guy I knew one time who was a librarian, and so it's big within the library field and stuff as well, because it's about cataloguing and indexing and stuff as well.
So, if you were going to advise someone who was new to the industry or desperate to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you give them, other than to set up a smashing London pop-ups Instagram feed?
Well, don't do that.
Not really competition.
No. No, but seriously, sort of, what I think is, when I interview people, what I do look for is people who are already doing stuff. Because I think 20 years ago, if you wanted a job in an ad agency, it was quite hard to work in advertising because there weren't really any tools that you could do. Maybe you could have done something for your university squash society, or. But now, you can become a master in Instagram. You can have a really arcane blog about all sorts of different things. So I think it's really about sort of showing that you've got a passion, and also showing you've got an interest in trying to work out how the technology works, trying to work out, and also just trying to work out how the world works. I think one thing that's always served me very well is I'm just really curious about the world, and I'm really curious about how things like pop-up restaurants work. Why you get pop-up restaurants in Clapton if you don't get them in Clapham, for example.
What is the answer?
Well, the reason for that is that the food options in Clapham are all very well established and open 7 days a week at all sorts of time of day and night. And in Clapton, not. Well, now they are, but like 5 years ago they weren't really.
That's of course a very succinct answer to that.
But it took me ages to work out why I was sort of jumping on the overland and walking into the middle of nowhere in places like Clapton and Hackney.
I absolutely love learning that about it. It's brilliant. I'm so happy to do the rest of the podcast on food pop-ups. But your shiny new object.
Yes.
It could have been a pop-up, couldn't it? Well, I guess
it's not marketing. It's not marketing technology, sadly. Yeah.
Well, I guess it isn't.
Well, it kind of
isn't. Sort of.
It kind of is, and some brands have done good ones, but quite often brands just sort of jump into the craze and things and don't necessarily do it all that well. But anyway, yeah.
But your shiny new object is programmatic.
Yes.
Media buying.
Yes.
Right. So what is that for people who don't know?
So programmatic media buying is a way of automatically buying and selling advertising space. So, if we go back 20 years ago, if we go back to pre-digital, trading on TV was, people ringing each other up or people sending emails. Ditto newspapers, and you would negotiate to get space, and you would argue for what you wanted. And programmatic is really the technology that brings the buyer, as in the agency usually, or the client directly, and the seller, as in the newspaper or the publisher or the website, together to automatically decide which advert should go where on. Well, at the moment on websites, but sort of coming soon will be, well, in fact already within things like audio, like Spotify, but also within outdoor advertising, and already a little bit, but increasingly within things like TV. And so as a sort of personal story, when I worked for an ad serving company, the company I worked for effectively sort of pioneered what we would call behavioural targeting. And the concept behind behavioural targeting is that people who buy cars don't only look at car magazines and don't only look at the car section of a newspaper and don't only watch car programs. And if you can find those people in other environments, then you can advertise to them more cheaply than you could within the car section or within the car magazine or whatever it would be. And in fact, years ago, I think it was Nissan Micra did a very innovative, award-winning campaign where they basically created, I think the Micra, when they first brought it in, was a really innovative sort of little bubbly shape. And they created these little adverts that would slot in anywhere within the paper, so they put them onto the TV page, and you just see this little Nissan Micra, because people who read the TV page, they buy cars as well, they're in the market for that sort of thing. And so the idea of behavioural targeting is sort of taking that to its digital level, where you can track through cookies, this person has recently been to a car site, and even though they're now checking their email, or even though they're now looking at a mapping site, we can show them an advert for cars, because we know, or we suspect, because they visited a car site, that they're probably in the market for cars. And so what Programmatic does, it also involves a bid element where somebody buying the media might say, we want to advertise to people who have visited a car site 3 times within the last 7 days. And to reach someone like that with our banner, we're willing to pay such and such. And at the same time, somebody else might say, we're advertising a holiday, and we're interested in somebody who lives in this sort of area and who also reads newspapers like the Financial Times or maybe the Guardian. And so if somebody comes up who has those attributes, we want to advertise to them, and we're willing to pay this much for it. And so how the system then works is, when somebody arrives on a website, it quickly interrogates their cookies and other sort of things it knows about them, and it decides through the bidding process which is the most efficient advert for them to be shown. And that's kind of simplifying it, and I hope people who are sort of hardcore programmatic specialists aren't sort of throwing things aren't throwing their phone out of the window at this point. But effectively, that's how it works. And for an advertiser, what this should ensure is that your advert is put in front of people who are relevant to the product you're trying to sell. And for a publisher, what it should ensure is that the advertising shown on your pages is relevant to the visitors, but also that you're getting a good price for the advertising, because people are willing to bid money to reach these people who visited your site, rather than simply saying, well, we know this site is about such and such, we imagine people who visit this site are into such and such, and therefore we'll put this advert for something in that category so that they can see it within this context.
So I'd like to give you a special award for describing very succinctly what programmatic is without using any 3-letter acronyms.
Well, absolutely, and that's one thing. That's one thing that I think the industry doesn't necessarily do well. In that, endless DSP, SSP, DMP, DCO, and all the other ones I've forgotten. And there's a whole lot of jargon, and hopefully, I think I've roughly got it right. Hopefully, I've sort of explained why it is a good idea, why it's not necessarily the only sort of advertising you want to do, but why for some sorts of products and services, for both advertisers and for publishers, it can be an efficient way that the market should work. And again, my economics degree coming in as well.
So, great description, thank you. And we'll touch on the future of programmatic in a bit. I think we'll go there later. But programmatic's had a bit of a bad name.
Yes.
Why is that?
So there's a whole load of things. One is so firstly, I'd have to say, there's good and bad social media marketing. There's good and bad TV advertising. There's good and bad everything within marketing, really. And so obviously there is some programmatic advertising which is not very good. There's a few issues. One is an issue of there's the whole sort of Breitbart issue where for people unaware of this, after the 2016 election, an activist in America who was purely a hobbyist, he set up a website and a Twitter feed called Sleeping Giants. And what he would do is he would take screen grabs of Breitbart, which was a very conservative, alt-right leading website, and he would show screen grabs of mainstream brands advertising, next to pretty reprehensible headlines, and would then address those brands on Twitter and say, "Did you know your advertising has funded this?" And that's purely because of programmatic, because by and large these brands didn't know, because they hadn't really realised that their agency maybe wasn't specifically buying sites in the way that they specifically buy newspapers or specifically buy TV shows. And so what happens is that if you do the advertising where you're targeting people who are car buyers, or you're targeting people who are likely to be able to afford a holiday, a certain sort of holiday, then you will end up on sites like Breitbart, because people who buy cars visit Breitbart, people who go on holiday visit Breitbart, people who live in such and such an area of the world go to Breitbart. And so what you're able to use is a number of tools where you can either blacklist sites and say, here are a list of sites we specifically don't want to be on, or you can whitelist sites and you could say, here are a set of sites we specifically do want to be on, and this list could be 1,000 sites long or something. And then you also get things like private marketplaces. But
what's a private marketplace?
So a private marketplace is effectively where you've put together a lot of premium but sort of trustworthy and safe content. And so then you within the programmatic, then people are effectively bidding for that content rather than across the whole web.
And so do you feel that the industry has answered that criticism with black and white lists, or does stuff still slip through the gaps?
So firstly, I don't speak for the industry, but I think the awareness has got a lot higher through things like Sleeping Giants, and also through there's the whole thing about brand unsafe content, and it's about maybe it's not a site like Breitbart, it's just somebody's blog, and a particular blog post on a particular day is something that you wouldn't want your brand to be associated with. So I think there is a lot more awareness that when you do programmatic, you don't want to be exclusively buying on an audience. You want to have a few other sort of safety criteria in as well. And there are companies which specifically set up to look for make sure you don't advertise on pages with certain words on, certain pictures on, and to basically audit and check that where the advertising is appearing, it is.
And who are these businesses? Who do you think?
So companies like Double Verify. There are companies like, I don't know whether Grape Shot particularly did it for avoiding certain words, but there's a couple of companies whose names I've forgotten.
So
where they can analyse a photo, and they can see if a photo is an explosion or is something on fire, and then not put your advert on that page.
So one popular podcast we've had was Mary Keane Dawson from Truth.
Oh yeah.
So her proposition is the idea that every single ad you buy anywhere is registered on the blockchain, and the location of that ad. So how do you feel about businesses like that? Is that a worry to someone like Carat, or is that just?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think. I mean, we're currently investigating some, well, as I'm sure all agencies are, some ways of using blockchain for clients. And I think as long as the principle of we want to advertise to these people, rather than specifically dealing around context, I think as long as that principle is still intact, then other tools that will increase your safety, whether sort of proactively or reactively, or sort of beforehand or afterwards in an audit, then they're very good.
And so, can we go back to the
Sure.
future of programmatic stuff? Which is, so you mentioned Spotify, outdoor TV. We learned about AdSmart on the podcast.
Yes.
Is it that kind of project that you?
So I don't know whether AdSmart particularly counts as programmatic. I suppose it does. So within TV, it's mostly within catch up. So with Channel 4, where you have, if you watch something on catch up, then you get the advert breaks, and as I understand it, those ads are inserted programmatically.
Right,
and
so
that would
you buy against people's viewing history.
So you might buy against their viewing history. So with Channel 4, you have to be a logged in user to watch, and so they know various things about you. I think you fill in a questionnaire and things as well. So they'll probably know your rough gender, your age. They'll probably be able to work out from the IP address where you live as well. And again, they may be able to get other sorts of signals from the cookies on your machine to actually decide which ad would be best to show you.
And do you think that all TV is going to go programmatic eventually, or?
Well, I think it's I think eventually is obviously a very big word, and I think
in the next 5 years, or is it?
I think so. So not all within 5 years, I don't think, but I think. I think more and more it will, and Facebook's trying to get involved with Facebook Watch, where there's a tab. I haven't got it yet actually, but there's a tab on some people's Facebook apps that allows you to watch videos, and it's not simply the short form content; it's longer form content, and then within that, Facebook has deliberately designed or deliberately wants people to produce scripted and semi-scripted content, so you can put advert breaks in the middle and then presumably target ads on you in that sort of way. And ditto YouTube actually YouTube Premium doesn't have adverts with it, but if you watch YouTube on TV, I think you're now able to target device in the way that you can with mobile as well.
So does this mean that advertising is going to get better for the consumer?
Well, that's so the theory is that you'll see fewer ads, but you'll see ads more tailored to you. So if you don't have kids, you won't see ads for nappies, but also that the advertising will be potentially more expensive, because also they'll be able to more accurately estimate when somebody might be in the market for something, rather than you're the sort of person who buys something like this. And
so we talked briefly downstairs about dynamic creative optimization.
Yes.
So do you see that as a subset of programmatic? But tell me a bit about that.
Well, so dynamic creative optimization is effectively the creative side of programmatic, where again, to use a very simple case, what you might notice is that a certain sort of person. Let's use this example. So you're a car company, and you're trying to. You've got a whole range of cars, from SUVs to sports cars, and you've got an advert, and you don't show the same advert to everybody, because you know something about the person you're showing an advert to. And so if you know somebody, if you know from sort of inferring data about them through what sort of websites they visit, and maybe other sorts of things like their location. So whether you can, get some sort of idea of what their IP address is, you might be better to show them an SUV or a people carrier, and other people you might be better to show them a sports car, to use a very sort of binary use a very sort of binary example. So then when you take that to the next level, you can say, well, let's personalize an advert to say, it's a sunny day, why don't you go and do such and such? Or on another day to say, it's raining, but never mind, you can do such and such. And so you can build in cues like that from things like the weather to then alter the creative message you're sending to somebody. And the analogy I'd use for this is that if you're creating an ad like that, it's almost like creating something like a choose-your-own-adventure story. So you're not telling necessarily a story with a beginning or an advertising message with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but starts off like this, then goes in this direction, then down in this direction, and then finishes up here.
And so, what are the limitations of this technology? What problems are you having selling this in, or what is the hesitancy you've seen with clients?
So I think the limitations are things in terms of the data you can get access to. And also, I think you can, we speak to people who do digital creative optimization, and we all know, or a lot of us in agencies know how it works. A lot of people who don't work in agencies don't know how it works, and you can get too personalized and you can get too creepy. I remember seeing an advert a while ago. I think I was going somewhere. I've been looking at flights to Barcelona, and then 2 days later, this advert pops up for, it might have been EasyJet or Ryanair. Said, "Do you still want to go to Barcelona on such and such?" And for me, I thought that was really fascinating because I'd not seen that done before. I thought that was really interesting use of my data and things. But I know people who would just find that totally freaky. And there's all sorts of urban myths, which I'm sure we've all heard about. I was talking about such and such to my friend, and then the next ad I saw on Facebook was for such and such. So I think the limitation. Well, part of the limitation is obviously nothing works perfectly, and so you might think it'd be a really good idea to do something, and then it doesn't actually end up working. But the other thing as well is obviously to be really conscious beyond the legal requirement in how to use data and how to show respect for people's privacy, and to just because you can do something and just because you're legally allowed to do something doesn't mean you necessarily should do it.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Okay, so how does this work in audio? Is that like on Spotify? Is that a huge opportunity for brands?
So I think so, yeah. So with audio, we've heard some really interesting examples of audio. There's a company called, I think it's A Million Ads. Do you know A Million Ads?
Yeah, no, Steve.
Yeah. So we know them quite well, and
have you worked with them?
So we did. We've done some campaigns for them. It said, "Hey, it's raining. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Why don't you just do such and such?"
It's always
like
rain
that.
though.
Or it's a beautiful day.
No, it's never that. It's always like, hey,
really?
Hey, Western Supermare, it's pouring down outside. Why don't you buy a raincoat? It's never like, well, it's 22 degrees.
Well, I suppose so. But I suppose they have to. I suppose you have to say something that's relatively striking, don't you? Really, I always imagine that to be like Toast of London, where you just have somebody in a radio studio or somebody in studio saying, "It's rainy, it's sunny, it's Tuesday, it's Monday."
So in this realm of personalization and dynamic creative optimization, programmatic, at some point, the first mover advantage of being able to say, "Hey Dan, do you still want to go to Barcelona?" You notice that. It's fortunate you didn't feel freaked out about it because you work in the industry and you get that there's no one spying on you. But assuming that gets back past the majority of people who don't mind that kind of thing, like the second, third, it's like the first banner ad. Does that mean that agencies are going to have to constantly be finding new data and constantly become with creative ideas? Because the first time you get an ad that says, "Hey Tom," great. The second time, it's half as effective and then vanishes into a long tail of insignificance.
I think within genre, you wouldn't notice. I think that wasn't very well expressed. What I think is, if it's done well, you wouldn't notice that it was the same thing, because I mean, one of the problems with one of the things I used to do when I was working in offline media was look at effective frequency for a TV advert, and you would see that actually some adverts work the first time people see them, or they already know the brand and they just need like a little nudge to get them. Oh yeah, that they just sort of remember it again for another couple of weeks. Other ones you need more frequency to get them to have heard about something in the first place, or to get them to buy into some sort of idea, or to get them to remember the name of the brand. So there's always been a lot of work around what sort of frequency people need to see messages. And there's also, who was it? Somebody's I can't remember. It'll come to me on the way home probably. But somebody wrote something saying that effectively agencies always want to change advertising campaigns before the brand does, and or people who work in marketing always want to change advertising campaigns before consumers are bored of them. And so I think the point is, you would not notice. You would just say, oh, it's another ad for such and such. Okay, but actually they've taken a new slant on it today or something.
So the opportunity with dynamic creative optimization and personalization is to change an ad before the consumer gets bored of it.
Well, no, it's to make it more relevant with the message. However,
how many times have I done that? Sorry.
However, it's to make it relevant, whatever is going to make it relevant for the person, whether it's hey, it's sunny, or whether it's
it's raining.
Showing or showing or working out that it's probably about now that they need to replace such and such that they bought a while ago, or something, but without obviously, but doing it in a very sort of seamless and natural way, which is kind of where the creativity comes into it.
Dan, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. I feel we've traversed a giant chasm between dynamic creative optimization and food pop-ups. Tell me your next London pop-up you're going to.
I am going to it's not a pop-up, but it's a launch of an upmarket kebab restaurant that started off as a pop-up.
Right, and what's that called? Where is it?
I can't exactly remember where it's called. It's somewhere around Covent Garden. I think I might have a +1 actually if you're around.
Dude, wow! Finally, this podcast is paid.
Well, let me know. Let me know anyway.
I will do. Wow! And in fairness, Penny Parnell from Not on the High Street gave me a copy of Mice and Men.
Oh, really?
Which is a book, and I've never read it before. I read it. It was brilliant. So there we go. So far I've done 20 podcasts. I've got a kebab and a
Excellent.
book. If you want to get in touch with you, Dan, how would you prefer they did that?
So on Twitter, I am at Dan Cal, DANCALL, 7 letters. And yeah, just at me on that. And I don't get all that many notifications on Twitter, so I'll probably notice it.
And it's at London Pop-Up, all the words.
Ups, plural. So back in the day, somebody owned the domain London Pop-Up singular. So I bought London Pop-Ups plural to get the .com, and then it just and actually it probably is a better name than Pop-Up singular.
I think so. Dan, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.